As you know, we're spending a lot of time focused on the midterm elections just 3 weeks from today. In fact, right here from our Washington studios, Salem News Channel will be giving you live election night coverage. And well, in the old days on election night, we could actually tell you who won or who lost. These days, it's hard to even tell the next morning. That's one of the problems with our elections these days. It's drawn out. The counting of the ballots is drawn out. It doesn't seem like a very transparent process. And oh, by the way, at the end of the day, I've noticed over the last 20 years or so, the losing side doesn't feel like everything was handled in an up-and-up way. That's not good. It's not good for our country, no matter who's on the losing side, and it's got to be fixed. Joining us right now is the former Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Virginia, and now the National Chairman of the Election Transparency Initiative. He is Ken Cuccinelli. And Ken, that's really the crux of this, isn't it? All of us as Americans, after we utilize the democratic process to choose our elected representatives, we should at least have the feeling, win or lose, that everything was done on the up and up.
Yeah, the analogy I use is going to court. Even if you lose, you should feel like you got a fair shake from the judge. And when people don't feel strongly that way, you have problems at a societal level. And the Election Transparency Initiative, our gold standard is that even the losing side is confident in the outcome. All 50 states have work to do in that regard. Some are way ahead of others. Some are trying to march backwards. Hello, Illinois. But most states, we have seen substantial improvements over the course of the last 2 years.
Let's start with this basic fundamental principle that in America, this is up to each individual state within certain guidelines. Obviously, the federal government has certain protocols that you have to adhere to. But beyond that, each election is managed by and ruled by the legislation in that state. Democrats want to nationalize this. We saw this with the number one bill they tried to pass out of the House and the Senate this last session. What's wrong with that idea? What's wrong with nationalizing these rules so that in every state elections are run the same way?
Well, for starters, it suggests people think they know better than the founding fathers who left the states running this for 230 years. And yes, we have had problems, but we're never going to be perfect. And Lord knows, Washington doesn't solve problems, it makes them worse.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, we're having trouble getting messages back and forth. Let's get the post office to do it. Whose solution would that be? And I can also tell you, as the former DHS Deputy Secretary, that from a security standpoint, our problems have been primarily internal. But when we're defending against Russian, Chinese, Iranian, North Korean, actual interference, actual hack attempts, and so forth, if all they had to do was hack one big system, that's a lot more attractive for them to attempt than if they have to hack 51 systems and kind of guess right on which states to hack, that if they succeed, they can change the outcome. Because every time they do it, they risk being caught. And that's obviously something they would want to avoid in those circumstances. So it's a lot safer from an international security standpoint to have states running elections.
Well, before we get into some of the trouble zones that we see in this country, let's talk about some of the bright spots. First of all, Georgia. Georgia just had a pretty tough go-around in 2020. There was a lot of criticism about how that election went, and so they went about legislating, and the Democrats, Joe Biden called it Jim Crow on steroids, Jim Crow 2.0. Well, Mr. Cuccinelli, I just saw huge stories yesterday that the early voting started in the state of Georgia, where we've got Jim Crow 2.0, and they broke records for the number of early voters yesterday. So is there really voter suppression going on in Georgia, or did they actually take some steps to solidify their system?
No, that's a complete myth. It dates back to, of course, Stacey Abrams' big lie in 2018 that the election was stolen from her, a denial that she now denies. But the fact of the matter is, we saw in the primary this year a massive turnout among every racial and partisan group. You can divide it up however you like. There was greater confidence and participation in Georgia elections this year than we've seen in years past. And that's as a result of the reforms, not in spite of them. So this whole voter suppression narrative is exactly that. It's a narrative. And you know it's bad when even the Washington Post gives Joe Biden its pants on fire liar rating for Pinocchios for his Jim Crow 2.0 malarkey, to quote the president further. That it truly has been beneficial in many states: Georgia, Texas, Arizona, Florida, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Well, not so much Wisconsin. The governor there has vetoed things. But Virginia has passed some things, Kentucky, South Carolina, even New Jersey, blue New Jersey, passed some transparency legislation this summer. And Michigan just rather quietly signed some legislation recently. It's minor, but it's helpful, particularly to your point about getting counted as quickly after the polls close as possible, while not, if everybody was honest and accurate, it wouldn't matter. But people get real antsy the longer it takes.
Yeah, and listen, we have these protocols in place so people don't steal elections, so they don't cheat. Because, I mean, we just saw out of Philadelphia, the FBI announced and the Justice Department announced a settlement in a criminal case involving a former congressman where he was literally stuffing the ballot for multiple elections. So there's a reason why we have these protocols and laws in place, which makes me think of Florida. After the 2000 hanging Chad fiasco, say what you will about Jeb Bush, but he said, we're going to fix this. We're going to make this better. And he did. I was struck by the fact that in a state that is as heavily populated as it is, geographically diverse, on election night, even though it was relatively close, we knew who won. That's all we asked for.
So they set about for years after Bush v. Gore fixing what was wrong. And nobody really alleged fraud in Bush v. Gore. It was just a level of incompetence and then people trying to game the rules where both sides got very nervous, I'll put it that way. Yeah. And really, the rules that you have in place should carry you all the way through. You can't changing them in the middle, like we saw a lot in 2020 with COVID used as the excuse. I mean, ask a 2-year-old how fair they think that is. Yeah. Adults certainly don't react well.
Well, and you mentioned Pennsylvania, and I know that they did do a little bit to fix what was going on there, but my antenna's up again because they have a rule. If you do a mail-in ballot, you have to date the outside of the envelope of the mail-in ballot. Supreme Court actually said, yes, that is appropriate, that is right. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and yet now the state of Pennsylvania, I saw, is basically saying, well, to hell with you, Supreme Court. We're just going to go ahead and ignore the date on the outside of the envelope. How can they move forward that way?
And isn't it interesting when left-wing politicians utilize nullification, you don't hear the N-word. It's not in the media. But that's what the Secretary of State, appointed by the governor in Pennsylvania, has done, is nullify a Supreme Court ruling. And, the left-wing journalists jump all over those of us on the right when we do anything they think they can characterize as nullification. So far, they haven't been right. But it really undermines confidence in the outcome when you have the state government violating its own laws. Because all the Supreme Court was doing was saying the law on the books in Pennsylvania is legit. And should be enforced. And that's all they were saying.
And if you don't like it, change the law. Real fast, Ken Cuccinelli, how important are the voter rolls? I've lived in Washington for 10 years now. I still get mail-in ballots from Los Angeles County, California, even though I have, and I've already told them, but actually I get multiple ballots from Los Angeles County. That's a real problem. That's a wide open door for fraud, isn't it?
It is, and one of the weaknesses all 50 states and the District of Columbia share is low-quality voter rolls. And I am unconvinced by lots of people in lots of states who say, oh, not our voter rolls. I just don't buy it. Government, strangely enough, looks to government to solve these problems instead of the private sector. If you want to go sell something on Amazon, they run you through, however many databases private, and they're 99.9% sure of who you are before they let you proceed. Why can't we do that? It's quick, it's not expensive, and it doesn't have to be decisive. It just delivers question marks to those responsible for the voter rolls. And it's amazing how inside the box, both parties, by the way, remain in thinking about cleaning up the voter rolls. And on the radical left, they don't want to clean up the voter rolls because they want to sort of spray lots of ballots around there and hide fraud in the incompetent.
Ken Cuccinelli, thanks for joining us tonight.
I'll be here.
More to come on O'Connor Tonight.